Everybody online and in person. My name's Heidi Nauman. I'm the practice manager for Bhakti Brain Health Clinic, and I get the privilege of introducing our guest speaker tonight. Kellan Gray is a Scottish-based American conductor who's earned a reputation as a versatile and imaginative artist, celebrated for his diverse array of traditional and experimental programming, thrilling performances, and provocative multimedia concert experience curation. He's one of the foremost experts and interpreters of the music of African diasporic composers, for whom he is a passionate advocate and champion. Born and raised in Rock Hill, South Carolina, Kellan's early professional life took him on a diverse path ranging from orchestral violinist to beekeeper, ooh, I love that, before turning his full-time attention to conducting. Since the end of 2023, he serves as Associate Artist of the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, a newly created role that sees him conduct, curate, and present programs right across the series offerings. Gray is also a conductor and artistic director of the Lafayette Symphony Orchestra in Indiana, beginning in the 2024 season. And I personally have been listening to Kellan Gray's music on Spotify for the last few weeks, and we love it in our house. So if you haven't done that yet, find it and listen to it. We'll also send you a link to some more of his music after tonight. So without further ado, Kellan Gray.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be with you. I'm a conductor by trade, associated with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra in Glasgow, Scotland, and also the artistic director of the Lafayette Symphony in Indiana. Preparing for this presentation tonight has been an interesting journey, different than I thought it would be when talking about, I guess, peak performance in music and brain health. It was really sort of a retracing of steps from my earliest career and revisiting what felt like sort of dire solutions to some very enormous roadblocks early in my conducting journey. But before we get into that, I guess some of you maybe wonder what a conductor actually does. How many have actually been to a classical music concert, an orchestral concert? You have one of the finest orchestras in the country here in Minneapolis at the Minnesota Orchestra. I like that. It's like two of the finest orchestras in the United States. It's true. St. Paul Chamber Orchestra and the Minnesota Orchestra. Well, those of you who have sat in the audience, mostly what you see is sort of the back end of the conductor sort of silently waving arms and what seems maybe like controlling the musicians, but it's not really control at all, and not even in the loosest definition. The musicians of the orchestra can indeed play the pieces by themselves without the conductor, but what the conductor provides is perspective that usually roots the performance in best possible intentions of the composer in a very expeditious fashion, probably more expeditious than the democracy of 80 musicians in a rehearsal. And what you see in performance in this sort of nonverbal communication of the hands is really a communication that reminds the orchestra of what was planned in rehearsal, and in some special cases, something spontaneous that wasn't rehearsed. And that hopefully that usually elicits a positive spark in performance. Sometimes it doesn't, but you hope that it does. I know that some of our functional forums have probably dealt with sports in the past, and I guess if you've not really experienced an orchestra, especially really fantastic orchestras like you have here up close, you can probably, I would compare it most closely to synchronized swimming, or maybe even like the Blue Angels fighter pilots. Everything is such precision work that happens so incredibly fast, and it all has to happen together. And in the case of an orchestra, it literally could be 30, 70, or 100 musicians having to sort of turn these tight corners all together at the same time. And as a conductor, me having to sort of prepare to guide and communicate with a body like that only with my hands requires a lot of preparation. For me, it's usually about 6 hours of score study a day, 1 hour of actual conducting practice, and that doesn't include historical context and study of each composer and each work, learning best performance practices for the works, even seeing other performances to widen my reference frame of those. But in my first years of conducting, which is what we'll talk about the most, I had a significant hurdle in overcoming work capacity when it came to score study, which is the primary thing that a conductor usually does. It's difficult to put a ratio on how many hours of study go into each performance. It really depends on the rigor and the difficulty of the work, and sometimes how long the work is. I brought a score with me that I'll use as a prop here to sort of demonstrate, but it's an enormous amount of study, and it's where we spend the majority of our time is alone in a room with a book of notes in front of us. But again, in my early days, I had a serious issue with work capacity and study. After maybe 1 hour of study, I would experience extreme brain fog, fatigue. I'd often have to take a nap in order just to refresh my mind to do 1 more hour of score study, which was a huge issue for me because I usually had about 4 hours of study that was required of me daily. But within that same year, I was actually diagnosed with dyslexia. And this was the very same year I started my conducting journey, which ended up sort of being a blessing in some of the, I guess, techniques that I was offered to cope with dyslexia led me to explore some other options, I guess, really explore some ways to sort of what I thought at the time was supplementing my brain to expand my work capacity. But one particular word stuck in my mind that a doctor mentioned to me was neuroplasticity. And my immediate thought was, how do I get more of that? Neuroplasticity being the brain's ability to reorganize itself and form new connections for adaptation, learning new skills, recovering from injury or damage even. Basically, the brain's ability to improve itself based on experiences and environments. And so I took a bit of a journey. To give you some sort of indication what conducting is actually like in the score study, this is an example I love to use. If you'll notice the score on the left, this is a 4-part chorale by C.P.E. Bach. He was one of the many children of Johann Sebastian Bach and was one of the most progressive composers of all his children. I think he had around 13 children or so. You'll notice on the far left end of the top system, there are 4 symbols. I'm going to step out of frame just for a second. A soprano clef, an alto clef, a tenor clef, and a bass clef. All of those are ways in which each musician, in this case vocalist, are going to be reading these particular clefs. They're actually reading a different language from each other. The same content, but they sort of speak a different language. So if you can imagine reading a book, and the book is written in 4 different languages with 4 characters, and each character speaks their own language from their native tongue, and you have to be fluent in each language simultaneously to get the story. That's sort of what your brain goes through in only 4 voices. But most of our scores look like this, where there are many voices, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 voices, all speak. Some of them have a language in common, but there's at least 8 different languages up there that they all have to speak at the same time. And you have to know all of it as a conductor. In fact, this is a score that I'm studying right now. It's the 1919 version of Stravinsky's Firebird. And so for every one of those lines, you have to not only speak the language, but you have to make a choice about every single note on the page. And it goes on and on. Truly, it's a very, very taxing on the brain. And that's just the hours that you spend daily on it, let alone what you actually go through in rehearsal or in performance, where you're up there building this sort of nonverbal language with the musicians based on what you're hearing in your head. So simultaneously, you're hearing the piece that you've studied up here in your mind, dictating that to the orchestra through your hands, while also listening to what's coming at you from the orchestra. In fact, it's so mentally overwhelming. Conductors have that we refer to as podium deafness, where your brain is so occupied by the things you're thinking about that you're not actually hearing the orchestra in front of you. If you can imagine 85 musicians in front of you, but you're actually not hearing anything because your thoughts are so loud. And it takes some time to get over that sometime, and luckily those years are behind me. But just to give you some idea of sort of what the brain goes through in both study and performance. But today, I'll present just a collection of research to you based on some lifestyle choices that came to me about cognitive function. Just through research of others, most of it comes from the NIH, the Sleep Foundation. And I should say first, I'm not a doctor. I'm not even a doctor of music. I don't play one on television either. And I'm not offering any medical advice. I guess I'm sort of just informing you on decisions that I made for myself as I tried to increase my neuroplasticity. So what is cognitive function in sort of its daily applications? They're operations generally within the prefrontal cortex right here above your eyes that allow us to interpret and react to the world around us, usually supporting our actions for attention and focus, orientation, memory, executive functions, language, social cognition, and visuospatial skills. For time's sake, today our discussion will apply primarily to habits that support attention, focus, and a bundle of executive functions. And executive functions being a set of micro functions allowing us to self-regulate for planning, prioritizing, and sustaining efforts. So sort of, i.e., bridging the gap between wanting to do something and actually getting it done. In my exploration through the research of others, I pursued ways to fuel my brain, is what I thought I was looking for in order to increase my work capacity. But those pursuits sort of came up empty. And where I found more concrete answers was actually researching ways to maintain optimal brain health, which unearthed a number of lifestyle choices that were less healthy than I thought they were. And they were primarily around sleep, hydration, diet, and supplementation. And we'll explore each one by one. Let's talk about optimal function. So as I mentioned, fueling the brain was a bit of a hollow pursuit, but supporting the structural integrity of the brain and neuron operations seemed to be where I was coming up short in my day-to-day life. So we'll talk about sleep first, which is the one I've had the most trouble with throughout my life. And it's actually taken literally until maybe 6 weeks ago until I actually feel like I'm sleeping well. And this is research that I found as old as 10 years ago, but only now I'm reapplying it in my life. So some recommendations from the Sleep Foundation: 7 to 9 hours of sleep for adults. Most adults that are in this room, obviously it's stratified by age here. Best to go to sleep at a consistent time each night, which was my biggest problem, and with as few interruptions as possible, which is obviously much easier said than done. Impacts of adequate sleep: enhanced memory, improved attention, sharper decision making, greater creativity, better emotional regulation, which obviously when we get less sleep, we're much more cranky. And much better structural brain health. Some impacts of deprivation, which I think many of us are probably very intimately familiar with: decreased attention and alertness, impaired memory, reduced executive function, generally when it comes to poor planning and impulse control. I find that I have my biggest sugar cravings on the days where I've had the least sleep the night before. Slower reaction time, which I wish I'd actually charted this out. I was by my performance coach over at Premier Performance across the parking lot there. I've been taking a reaction time test in the morning after my sleep, and there's a very clear correlation between less sleep and slower reaction time. I'll see if I can look it up on my phone again. It's really easy. It's free. You literally just, red square appears on your screen and you try to tap it as soon as it turns green. It actually measures your reaction time. Emotional dysregulation. Consistency matters so much. This is a huge one that I actually was not aware of until I experienced it personally. Regular sleep has just as many detrimental effects as sleep deprivation. And cumulative deficits, basically a sleep deficit or a sleep debt over time. Some conditions for optimal sleep. Again, this comes from the Sleep Foundation. Avoid blue and white light 1 to 3 hours before bed. Usually around 9 o'clock is when my blue light blockers go on. I take them everywhere I go. Obviously, they're here with me now, though I'm standing in front of these 2 laptops without them. Perhaps having your final meal 2 to 4 hours before bed. Shower or a bath 2 to 3 hours before bed. So the body needs to decrease its temperature by 1 degree before you can actually fall asleep. And obviously, hotter shower or bath raises the body temperature, but within 2 to 3 hours, you can probably get that lower body temperature. So probably not a shower right before bed, but maybe just a couple hours before. Be in bed at the same time every night, allowing the body to develop the habit so that you can go at the same time in a room as dark as possible. I love the sun. In fact, my partner and I are complete opposites. They love to have the room as dark as possible. And I mean, they sleep usually about 2 hours longer than I do each day. I'm a morning person. I spring up with the sun and I throw the blinds open and like that whole deal. So our bargain is that we don't have curtains so that I can see the sun, but I wear a sleep mask. And the one that I particularly use is the one courtesy of American Airlines from flying premium economy. So it doesn't have to be expensive. So, like every time I fly, I get one of these. Let's see some further sleep information if you'd like it on sleep health, sleep solutions, sleep environment, therapy, mattresses, bedding. There's so much information on the Sleep Foundation's website at sleepfoundation.org. So I'd highly recommend venturing there. Let's talk about hydration next, which is, I believe, probably one of the most underestimated aspects of optimal brain health. The brain is approximately 73% composed of water. And most of the information that I'll discuss here came from the National Library of Medicine, courtesy of the National Institute of Health. Particularly from this study, the hydration equation, an update on water balance and cognitive performance. I don't know if anybody's used that as bedtime reading before, but it's riveting. But anyway, as I said, the brain is comprised of about 73% water, depending on the current fluid balance. And it actually relies on that for effective neural signaling, nutrient delivery, and waste removal. Even mild hydration, 1 to 2% body mass loss can impair attention, memory, and processing speeds, reaction times, everything. It's important to note that 1 to 2% loss is not enough to trigger a thirst response. Therefore, the brain actually suffers these effects before we actually feel thirsty. Let's talk about the function of water hydration for the brain. Structural integrity and brain volume. When dehydrated, brain cells lose water and they actually shrink, thus affecting our processing and memory. Neural signaling. Water facilitates the electrical and chemical signals needed for efficient brain communication, in addition to the structural integrity of the prefrontal cortex, our center for focus, decision-making, and impulse control. Protection and waste removal. Water is needed for the body to produce spinal fluid, which acts as a protective barrier around the brain and also supports the glyphatic system, which cleans out the toxins. This has been a really interesting conversation between myself and Dr. Adam at Premier. We're both big boxing fans. He's actually a boxing coach. And one of the more dangerous things is a boxer actually cutting weight the night before a fight and being dehydrated. And so obviously they're much more likely to get a concussion from being dehydrated from the loss of water and fluid around the brain. Neurotransmitter production. We'll talk about neurotransmitters and modulators when we get to the dietary portion, but these are essential for the brain's chemicals to regulate mood and function. Two of the most important ones being dopamine and serotonin. And blood volume, which dehydration reduces blood volume, limiting oxygen and nutrient flow to the brain. Some key impacts of dehydration, although the ones I just mentioned were scary enough. Impaired attention and concentration, difficulty focusing and maintaining focus on task, memory issues, reduced performance in short-term or working memory, slower processing, decreased motor skills and information processing, mood changes, increased irritability, fatigue, anxiety, and increased brain activity, which sounds like a positive, but it's actually your brain working harder to perform tasks. So indicated by a higher neural activation leading to fatigue. Some practical tips for hydration. Start your day with water before caffeine. 12 to 16 ounces of water before your coffee. Coffee is a mild diuretic, so it takes more water to process it than it actually has within it. And actually the caffeine masks your brain's thirst signal, so it actually makes you drink less water unless you intentionally do it. Drink water consistently throughout the day, not just when you're thirsty. As I mentioned, the thirst signal is delayed, particularly when you're in task mode. So I recommend habit stacking for consistent water consumption throughout the day. For me, a good habit stack is I drink one 12-ounce glass of water for every score study session, which is 2 score study sessions a day. Something important to note about the habit stacking and consistency, when you're under pressure or in task mode, your brain actually suppresses hunger and thirst cues. So you're less likely to actually feel thirsty, so intentionality is key. Keep a bottle of water visible at all times. This one obviously gets used a lot. Let's see, if you don't like the taste of water by itself, I must say Scotland has some of the most delicious tasting tap water in the world, but flavor it with mint or lemon or unsweetened juice if you'd like. Electrolytes are important for fluid loss. Electrolyte imbalance is one of the first signs of dehydration. Neurons, which again communicate the signals throughout the nervous system, need minerals such as potassium and sodium, which dissolve in water to send the actual electrical signals. So without the water to carry out these minerals, electrical signals slow down, making our thoughts feel sluggish, which I'm guessing for me was that sort of brain fog feel after 1 hour study. Who all remembers being recommended 8 glasses of water a day? Yeah, it's maybe not the most, it's a cut and dry way of thinking of it, but it's maybe not the most accurate. If you'd like to sort of tailor your amount to yourself, a really good shorthand is actually thinking about your body weight divided in half. Sorry, I couldn't find the divide tool, so I put multiply by half. So basically half your body weight and then equate it for ounces. So for me, I weigh about 190 pounds. So half of that being 95 pounds, so 95 ounces of water. Divided that by 12 for a 12-ounce glass, 7.92 or 8 12-ounce glasses of water a day. But you might want to adjust that based on activity, caffeine intake, and medication. Finally, nutrition. And I'll try to be as efficient as I can about this because it's the most complex and the longest. As I mentioned, I was really focused on fueling my brain. And that was, again, sort of a faulty pursuit when actually trying to seek its structural integrity and supporting neuron function was the most important thing. And nutrition was a difficult habit to break considering the lifestyle that I was living starting off as a conductor. So my first year as a conductor, I was a graduate student at Valdosta State University. In my master's in conducting, I was also the graduate student for the conducting teacher, a graduate assistant for the orchestra, a librarian for the orchestra, librarian for the regional orchestra, assistant conductor of the regional orchestra, along with other GA duties. So I was sleeping about 3 hours a night and maybe eating Skittles between class, clearly not really supporting a healthy cognitive function. So again, structural integrity and neuron function is what I found to be the most support for me. And so much of that comes from your phospholipids and essential fatty acids, EPA, DHA, omega-3 and omega-6. These are literally the foods that we eat provide the building blocks for the brain structure, its function and neuron operation. Beyond water, essential amino acids are one of the most important building blocks. Just as a quick reminder of the difference between omega-3 and omega-6 and some quick examples of that. Let's talk about the function of it. So again, providing structural integrity of the brain is highly important. About 60% of the brain is made up of those fatty acids and lipids. Neuron structure and firing. The neurons, which transmit the information throughout the body using those electrical impulses and chemical signals, have an external fatty layer. The manner in which that external layer is contacted regulates the electrical activity of the neurons and thus the signals it actually fires in our cognitive functions. So let's talk about some dietary sources of amino acids and the quantity necessary. Most of you know fish is a huge source of it, at least as far as a protein source of it. And some of the fish is double plural that provide the most fatty acids of mackerel, salmon, sardines, anchovy, and caviar if you can afford it. If you prefer the non-meat sources of it, chia seeds and walnuts are quite helpful, and often people supplement with fish oil, krill oil, or algae. Another important phospholipid, phosphatidylserine, It's a vital phospholipid in the cell membranes, essentially abundant in the brain, supporting cognitive functions like memory, focus, learning, and playing a role in signal firing and stress response, and nerve health as well. But jumping to its function, again, supports memory, learning, attention, focus, speed and processing. It's involved with the cell cycle signaling and also an immune response, stress relief as well. It supports short-term and long-term memory, learning, focus, and information recall, and essential for nerve cell membranes that act as cofactor for enzymes in the signaling pathways. So this is where the rubber meets the road for me, is how much of it do we need daily? So mostly it's found, phosphatidylserine is mostly found in high protein meats, in fish and cabbage, which I found to be a really interesting one for me. So those of you who like sauerkraut or kimchi, it's a great source of it. And you need about 300 milligrams of it daily. It is also sold as a supplement. It comes in capsule form, usually 300 milligram capsules. You can get them from Amazon, so on and so forth. Some side effects before we move on. It's generally considered safe, but could cause some mild side effects of insomnia, stomach ache, or bloating if you disagree with the supplement. There are plant-based versions like in soy or sunflower sources that are the origins of some supplements. So there are some warnings if you're pregnant or nursing and taking other medications, but that honestly goes a little bit beyond my expertise. Yes. When I was a high school wrestler, I took it every day, and I never thought I would revisit it. But it's actually something I take about 10 milligrams of a day now. But we'll get there. So we'll shift gears just a little bit into neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are endogenous; they're already in the body, and they're chemicals that allow neurons to communicate with each other throughout the body. They enable the brain to provide a variety of daily functions. Choline or acetylcholine is the one that I'm primarily familiar with. It's a vital one that helps muscle movement, memory, attention, and acts as like a chemical messenger throughout the body. Its particular function helps with muscle control, as I mentioned, regulates the nervous system, and supports brain function, again, by memory, learning, and focus. It also helps your circadian rhythm as well, regulates that as well. I'll skip its mechanisms for now, just for time, but let's get to its daily amount. So somewhere between 425 and 550 milligrams of it a day, or what that basically looks like in shorthand is about 3 or 4 large eggs. And its primary source is actually egg yolks, which, was not within my plan to get jacked. But again, this is focused on brain health and not physique. So eggs with the yolk, some non-animal sources of it are potatoes, nuts, grains, and seeds. Some deficiencies in this are related to memory loss and attention problems. And you can supplement it. Alpha GPC is a supplement that I actually use. It's usually sold in 300 milligrams. It does have a stimulant effect. I noticed it in taking it in the evenings. I used to score study more at night, and I had significant trouble sleeping after I took it. It is also used as a treatment sometimes in cognitive decline, but in huge quantities, 600 to 1200 milligrams, which for me, I think it would make me incredibly irritable. As I put in the side effects here, it can affect your anxiety as well. Creatine. So this is a natural compound in the muscles. As you mentioned, a lot of the guys in the gym use this. Yeah, it's something that I put in my coffee every single day, both my caffeinated coffee in the morning and decaffeinated coffee in the evening. It's a neurotransmitter. It's a natural compound in the muscles, so it's endogenous, but you can take it exogenously by putting it into the body. It supports brain function. It's found in red meat. It's mostly used in the form of creatine monohydrate, which is what you find in the jar that you put in your foods. Helps with energy production, muscle growth, it supports cognitive function. It's very widely studied. It's recommended that you take between 3 and 5 grams of it a day. But for some people who macro dose it for cognitive effects, again, this was just in studies, I'm not necessarily recommending it. They take between 6 and 10 grams, which is I take 10 grams a day. There are some side effects. Water retention, it does actually make your muscles hold more water, which can lead to weight gain, could lead to muscle cramps. I've never experienced them. I've never experienced dehydration from it, but perhaps someone would. But always consult your doctor if you have any concerns. And finally, antioxidants. One antioxidant in particular, anthocyanins. Obviously, antioxidants support cognitive and executive function, boosting brain blood flow, as well as reducing inflammation and stress. Particularly anthocyanins enhance blood flow to the brain, are neuroprotective, help with some of the neurosignaling, and they also regulate your relationship between your gut and your brain as well. Let's see. Some sources of anthocyanins. Generally, your anthocyanins are your very darkly colored fruits. So blueberries, some cherries, particularly tart cherries, plums, or any of the dark colored vegetables like kale or something like this. And so you would aim to get about 400 to 600 milligrams per day. And what that can look like is 1 to 2 cups of fresh blueberries, which is a good bit of blueberries, frankly. But if you're mixing it between blueberries, plums, sweet peppers, kale, I think you can get there. Not I think you can get there. I know you can get there because I do it every day. My diet is primarily is formed around the choices that you find in this presentation. And just quickly touching on movement, it wasn't one of the things that I wanted to focus on deeply tonight, just because I think we all know the relationship between cognitive function and exercise. But as someone who's trying to support my brain in trying to score study, I found that just 10 minutes of movement in the morning before I sit in front of a score is incredibly helpful. And just maybe to get a look at how sort of this looks at a daily application for me, I generally wake up at about 5:30 in the morning. And so 8:30 p.m. the night before is usually my wind down time. That's when the blue light blockers go on. 9 o'clock is sort of away from all the devices. 10:30 is when the lights are out, trying to get a minimum 7 hours of sleep and wearing my particular American Airlines, not sponsored by them, eye mask. Starting the morning with a 12-ounce glass of water, first thing, 20 minutes of yoga right after that, and 3 minutes of cold exposure. So when I'm in the U.S., I live in Baltimore with my partner, who's the principal harpist of the Baltimore Symphony, and I just go out on our balcony in the 20-degree weather, and I just stand there in my pajama shorts. My neighbors think I'm absolutely crazy. Because I might do some jumping jacks or some stretching in that 3 minutes. And then that goes directly into 35 minutes of conducting practice in which I have a 12-ounce glass of water. By that time, the sun's come up, so that's when I'll actually go back out on the balcony to get a couple minutes of sun exposure, just to get some light into my eyes, helping the circadian rhythm. And then that's when I actually have some coffee, is once the sun's actually come up. And just, I guess, as a quick example of a meal, just because we're just about out of time, my first meal of the day, I generally intermittent fast between, my window is 1 p.m. to 8 p.m. Generally, I have the same breakfast every morning or every afternoon. It's 3 eggs, 85 grams of ground beef, a handful of cabbage, sort of folded into one omelet, probably 1 bell of mushroom sliced in addition to 30 grams of blueberries, 15 grams of walnuts, and a tablespoon of honey, like on top of it. They're separate. I'm not putting the blueberries and the walnuts in the omelet. I used to have yogurt with it, but I found that that was sort of a bit of a calming effect on the body when I actually needed to energize myself in the early afternoon. So that's usually my dessert every night is yogurt. But we probably have just a little bit of time for maybe a couple questions, but saving most of the questions at the end. Are there any dire questions on anybody's mind that you'd like to ask that you just can't wait until the end for? Oh, yes. So I had a really wonderful AVS experience with Fran some weeks ago, like before the new year, before Christmas. So I came, it was my very first session in doing it. And she instructed me, as some of you are all probably familiar with, to take about 10 minutes just to allow your mind to relax and be in place. And then actually think about myself in performance. And I was thinking about a particular piece, Dvorak's American Suite, that I've been having a little bit of trouble on how I'd actually like to shape the phrase. And so I repeatedly saw myself walking up to the podium, visualizing myself walking up to the podium, hearing the opening bars in my mind, which you usually do before every performance, and then delivering to the orchestra. And after maybe about 4 or 5 times, I noticed that an idea came to me, and actually the exact way that I like to deliver it. It was literally as if I sort of went into flow state immediately as I was just lying there. And it was a really incredible experience, not only relaxing, but just sort of unfolded some answers to me that I felt I was forcing my way through. And I'm very much looking forward to the next time.
Well, I'm Guy Odishaw from Bhakti Brain Health Clinic, and we're going to talk, Fran and I are going to split up the presentation tonight and talk to you about what we do, neurotherapy, and in particular put a little spin on it today, kind of music in the brain. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of frequency, vibration, sound, music, and kind of move between those as if they're kind of one thing, and they kind of are, but they show up in different ways, and we think of them in different ways. But hopefully tonight, part of what you'll see is those are closer together than we might otherwise think. So we always like to just show some information here about kind of like who we studied with. In the world of neurofeedback, saying neurofeedback is a little bit like saying pharmaceutical. It doesn't tell you much of anything, right? It's like you walk into a pharmacy, there's hundreds of pills to treat hundreds of conditions. There's hundreds of kinds of neurofeedback to treat hundreds of conditions. So just saying neurofeedback doesn't actually tell you what the person or the provider of the clinic does, but this gives you an idea. So it's why we always include it. We put it on our website. If other professionals want to refer to us, then they know the school of thought that we practice in. So this is one of the questions we always get. So we like to just take it right off the bat. Is there research? Yes. If we talk about electrical stimulation, you're about 3.5 million studies. That'll keep you busy. And then if we go into neurofeedback and we look at more specific conditions, then the number of studies drop, but there's more than one. That's the main thing. Absolutely everything as far as the neurofeedback, neurotherapy goes is all evidence-based, and that's the foundation of our clinic. So just a little something to get us started. This comes out of what's called string theory. So in the world of quantum physics, maybe you're a string theory fan and maybe you're not, and maybe you have no idea what I'm talking about. That's fine. But this idea that the existence is made up of all these tiny filaments and they're like little instruments that are being played, and that's what existence is. So here's a quick summary of kind of what we're going to touch on tonight between Fran and I. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to say is just going to be kind of conceptual. And then Fran is going to take you into sort of the actual practical nuts and bolts of what we do and how we do it. So one of the things that I want to talk about, kind of starting from a little bit from physics, is this idea of vibration. And again, vibration and music, they're on a continuum from one another. One of the things about vibration or sound that we don't always think about is that just vibration has information in it. Right? So it's not just what you hear in terms of language, for example. Like hopefully what I'm saying is containing information when it gets to you. And so that's one way of thinking about it. But here, these shapes are produced, and we're going to watch a little video of these shapes being produced, and that this is the information that is embedded in sound, that if we didn't observe it in this way, we would never know. So what happens as we take single frequencies and start adding them together into this thing we call music? We start to look at the profound impact that has on us, from our physical cellular being all the way up to what we might think about when we think about listening to music. We think about like our subjective perception of it, right? Do I like it? I don't like it. Something like that. It moves me emotionally. And that's a perfectly good category to think about, but there's so much more that's happening. So we're going to take a peek here, and then I need Adam, the remote. Set the volume on this because this could be really loud or not. So the music you hear is not the music that's being played. They show the frequency, so that's just a single frequency being played into that plate, and then that generates the pattern that you see as what's called a standing wave develops, and then the sand moves to the sides of the standing wave, or in the trough of the frequency that is being generated. So that's our kind of sound in physics. So then we step up and we go to sound or vibration in biology. So the actual way that it's thought about changes from what we just watched, the what's called cymatics, into this kind of diffusion reaction. So slightly different physics, chemistry happening, but the same principle. So what they're showing here is that a pattern of vibration can account for the pattern in a tortoise shell. Right? And we might think that that's in the genes or wherever that's hiding, but it turns out that it is actually in a vibration that is within the biological system that creates that pattern. Great research at Tufts. They're using an AI scientist to introduce vibration into chemical reactions to change how those chemicals react. So they've created an AI scientist that is able to introduce vibration into chemical reactions. So when a plate of chemicals are reacting, just doing normal chemical things that we generally think of as constant. They don't change. So it's just so it's just like you put two chemicals together in addition, they're interacting. So sodium and potassium, and they're doing their thing. It's a little more complicated than that, but basically it's just chemical reactions. So then they're introducing vibration to that chemical reaction, and what they're finding is they're able to change the nature of the chemical reaction by the frequency that they add in. So to see that the frequency can change chemistry, something that we thought was set, it just does what it does. And so it's a fascinating area of research. So here we're going to look at this idea of how sound can affect our tissues, so our body, but then that can translate down to the level of the cell, and then even within the cell, it can affect the cytoskeletal structure and the organelles within the cell. So when we're listening to music, it isn't just, again, that subjective or even emotional response. Our tissues are having a response to the sound that is hitting us. So what I'm going to invite you to do is close your eyes if you're comfortable closing your eyes. I'm going to play a video here, and it's going to start off with like just a tone, just a monotone, and then it's going to go into just kind of a cacophony of sound, and then it's going to go into a choir singing, so more of a harmony. So you're going to get to kind of experience these three categories of sound. What I want you to do is not so much listen to it of, do I like it, the subjective side of it, but I want you to try and feel your nervous system and feel the effect of the sound on your nervous system, and just find all the different ways that you might be able to register how that sound is affecting your kind of psychophysical being. Okay? So so there's a bit of a lead in here. I'll see if I can get us through some of that. Shortly. Anybody have like one or two words they want to say about what they experienced? Okay.
Stress during the second. Yeah.
Second one? Yeah, it's a little hard on the nervous system, isn't it? Yeah. So, question?
Kurt Whitaker, Leland Saturn. 6 words.
Okay. Got it. It took me a moment to put all that together, but yeah, third one. Yeah. Yep. So just a sense of how music impacts us beyond our subjective. And again, all of these things, there's just incredible research behind what happens in the brain neurochemically, physically, when they actually study the structure of cells with different sounds being played. You can actually see a dysregulation in the cytoarchitecture of the cell. So a lot to be appreciated about music's effect on the body. So the main thing here, so we're gonna look at a little case study of Parkinson's, and you're actually gonna see a little bit of the experience we just had in that first one. So one of the things that happens in Parkinson's, right, is a kind of a rigidity, right? So think of that first tone that we had, right? You can think of that's a little bit like the Parkinsonian state, right? There's a rigidity, the mask of Parkinson's. And then what you're going to see is what happens to two different people when music is played, how it affects their nervous system. And so the first one I did so that you can hear the music and see the correlation between the music and how their gait changes. The second one, you won't see, or you won't hear the music, but the lady is walking with a walker and there's a little blue light on the bottom of the walker. And when that comes on, that means the music has started. She can hear it, we can't, but that's their sign. But the thing to kind of notice is before the music, her steps are not even a full foot, right? It's very much a shuffle. The music starts to play and it goes into a full stride. And it's really quite remarkable that that's just what happens to the brain when it hears music and affects the motor strip, and the motor strip starts to process the external cue instead of the internal cue. So much of what you just felt in your body happens. So we're going to take a look at that. So really absolutely remarkable how somebody can go from not being able to walk with something approximating a normal gait, and then you turn on music and then they can. Right? And there's just so much that's going on. So I also wanted to play this particular clip for you today as to plant a seed for later in the season when we're going to do a functional form on Parkinson's. So please come back for that one and we'll do even more. So I wanted to move into, so then what we do in EEG, so we're looking at rhythms in the brain, and we just looked at kind of how the brain responds to rhythm, but then what we work with is the rhythms of the brain. So that the delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma brain waves, and the mix of those, and when there's harmony or a lack of harmony in that. And so what you can see is that talk a little bit about here that we do this, kind of Z-score training, and what we do is take a dysregulated pattern of brain waves and we move it towards a kind of a data-based neuro-optimal pattern of firing. So we help synchronize the brain activity. Again, Fran is going to go into detail about how we do that. So here's an example, just saying if we take kind of this idea of dysregulation and we apply an external stimulus, and that what we can come out of that is an entrained state of greater synchrony. And then here's an actual picture of EEG. So this, what you see in the middle here is called the paroxysm. So if you look at the EEG on either side, normally EEG is quite well ordered, right? To just look at it, even if you've never looked at EEG before, you would look at it and be like, oh, like it's just all nicely going along in patterns and rhythms, and there's a way in which it just looks like it's in sync. And then you see something like that, and it doesn't take too much discussion, and you realize that just doesn't look good. And that's, the brain has kind of lost its rhythmicity. It's out of sync with itself. And what we do is help bring the brain back into sync with itself. We like to say we regulate dysregulation. So this is a specific form of analysis we do. It's called an independent component analysis. It's based on this idea of a pink noise. So you have a 1 over F slope. So you've got an example of what a 1 over F slope looks like technically. And then what a 1 over F slope looks like in a brain, we get this big peak here because what brains should do, what neurons do when they're not busy doing something, is they produce alpha or 10 hertz, right? So they're just saying, like, I'm ready to do something, but I'm not doing something. So a normal 1 over F is like this. It looks a lot like that line with this big peak. But then you see here, dysregulated 1 over F, where we've got a lot more activity going on than we should. So this is an overstimulated, overactive brain region in this area. This is one of the ways we analyze, this is one of the ways we look at something that is related to sound, this idea of pink noise and what pink noise is. And then the background activity of the brain is like pink noise. It's kind of random, but not exactly, or else it would be white noise if it was purely random, but it's pink noise with this big spike of 10 hertz. So this is part of the analysis we do to look at a brain and see how is this brain kind of out of rhythm and what do we need to do to bring it back into sync with itself. One of the things that came out of this for me, a kind of a question, is when somebody like Kellen is in front of the orchestra, or when a composer is composing or a conductor is conducting, are they conducting the orchestra or are they conducting our brain? Right? Is what's being played because this is actually the instrument that they're playing? Because we know a certain sound, a certain melody, a certain harmony, a certain sound reacts in most every brain the same way. A certain chord can evoke a reliable, predictable emotional response. So are they writing music that has a very common global effect? And well, I suspect that what's really happening is this is the instrument that is being played. This is what Kellen is up there conducting, is our brains. Fran is going to come tell you more about that.
Like part of what Guy was talking about, how, he thinks that maybe when Kellen is conducting the orchestra, he's actually conducting our brains. Absolutely happening. There's all kinds of research looking at how brains sync together when they are listening to music, sync to the same frequency. And so there's some research that's been done around Vivaldi's Four Seasons. And so this piece, I was going to play this. I recorded Abby and I recorded my brain waves as I listened to 3 of the 4 season movements, right? Because what we know is that each of those 3 tends to produce a particular type of brainwave. And so what you can see in the recording is that as you start to listen to the music, right, my brain's just kind of on standard beta wave because I'm just kind of been working and, talking to Abby and that kind of thing. And then as you start to listen to the music for probably around 5 to 7 minutes, somewhere around there, can start to see some of the theta waves show up. So the wave gets, kind of slower, and you can see that in the EEG as you look at it. And so one of the reasons I did this partly is because I love what music does to human beings. And I just was curious about it. But also, it's a way to, I find it fascinating to think about how a musician who is in the process of doing what they're doing, and this would include the conductor because you are in the midst of that, is at the same time as you're training my brain, you're also entraining your brain at the same time. And so it becomes this just big, lovely group of entrainment. And so I love the idea of thinking about sitting, listening to an orchestra with a group of people and thinking about the idea that in between each of our, the sets of ears, we all got that entrainment going on. And it's something then that I think that, when we look at peak performance for a musician, that you can use your own trade to enhance your peak performance, which is pretty cool, I think. But I can't play this because we got to get to talking about what we do here. Alpha, great, kind of a bridge to flow. Kellen was talking about his experience with audiovisual entrainment. We were giving him an alpha protocol, and that was kind of what allowed his brain to kind of get into that place where it got out of the way, and that kind of experience could happen for him. And gamma wave, which is turbo. So this is the presto movement, right? This is the summertime in Vivaldi's Four Seasons. And what you see on here when you watch it is almost from the get-go with this one. And my brain just immediately went into, it was just nothing but tight wave, right? That's gamma stuff going on. And so just a fascinating thing to think about, and then how we can use that for ourselves. And then I think about that in terms of what we do in the clinic and how cool it is that we can use technology to move your brain very quickly into that spot. But when you add in the music, it's just like getting, like a marshmallow on top or something, right? So I'm going to move in here because I want to be respectful of your time. So this slide just talks, the next couple of slides, a little bit about what we do in the clinic. Mostly I'm going to talk with you about this as we do some neurofeedback demonstration, and we'll talk about how that goes. When we work with people, and we're kind of this, we were talking about peak performance here, but really everything we do with any client who comes in is really really about peak performance. It's about optimizing brain functioning, right? Everything that Kellen was talking about, we're supporting the brain from a neurotherapy way to do those things that when you kind of add that into the regimen that Kellen's talking about, that's like really working on optimizing the brain. So we use neurofeedback. You're going to see that in a minute. We're going to see Randall's brain up on the screen here, and we're going to watch him engage in neurofeedback. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Neurofeedback is a learning paradigm. So literally what we are doing when we do neurofeedback is teaching your brain how to behave differently through operant conditioning. And what behave differently means is to run neural circuitry that's provides more support for optimal functioning, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we do the demonstration here. And then I'm going to move over here. We do neurostimulation in the clinic as well, transcranial alternating current, direct current. We throw in electromagnetic stimulation along with that oftentimes. And what that can be really, it's the neurostimulation is more of like a treatment paradigm. So if, say, somebody had some low peak alpha frequency, Guy told you it's, healthy peak alpha is at 10 hertz. Let's say somebody's down at 8.5 hertz kind of in general. And so we really want to promote the brain starting to produce more of a 10 hertz frequency. We can do that by literally putting some electrical stimulation on them that sort of kind of, we think of it as cajoling the neurons around there to start doing that same frequency, right? And so a lot of times in the clinic, we'll start out like clients do, typical round of neurotherapy is 40 sessions, coming in at least twice a week. Sometimes we have people who come in and do more intensives than that, so maybe they're coming in every day, that sort of thing. But oftentimes we'll start out with some neurostimulation as a way to kind of, address some of those maybe primary things that aren't happening, but also to support the brain kind of getting ready for the heavy lift, which is neurofeedback. Anybody who's done neurofeedback will tell you it works your brain out. You get tired, your brain gets tired very much like your muscles get tired when you go to the gym and work them out appropriately. Then we have audio-visual entrainment. That is what Kellen was talking about that he was doing. I would encourage all of you that are in the room here to give it a try. We've got some demos back there that you can just, put it on for a few minutes or 20 minutes, however long you want to do, just to kind of get a sense of what that is like. Audio-visual entrainment, again, is more like a treatment paradigm, but it literally is entraining the brain, kind of getting the brain to, like, you might be running a particular protocol, a particular frequency, and what that protocol is doing is getting the brain, the neurons around, so we're stimulating auditory and visuals, so around those areas to start producing that as well. And so you get this lovely state in the brain. And so it really is. I think if anyone's interested, talk to Kellen about it, and he'll tell you it is just absolutely can be a delightful way to spend some time. And you can do this. Like, I was thinking about you and your, all that you have to study, all of those notes, and I thought you need because we have view-through goggles, right? And we could just get you through that pretty easily. And then we also do photobiomodulation. So this is red, infrared, light therapy. We do that. It works really well in a variety of ways. When I think about peak performance, I think about how photobiomodulation does a really good job of enhancing the signaling of mitochondria, so the energy cells in the brain. And that can be really helpful, when you have to do things that require some really significant focus, but it also can be really good for anxiety. I'm around enough people who are musicians to know that can be a thing, right? And anybody who is a performer of any sort, anxiety can be a thing. It's good to a certain point, right? Because it can kind of energize us, but if it takes over, that creates some real issues with being able to perform optimally. That's why there's a whole profession of people who train help people with peak performance, because people get pretty anxious around it. And then we do a lot of heart rate variability training with our clients. We do actually assessment and training. Heart rate variability is a really powerful predictor of the health of your autonomic nervous system. And so if you think about this in terms of just your general brain health, a healthy autonomic nervous system becomes important, because when your autonomics are dysregulated, they can wreak havoc on you physically in all kinds of areas, cardio, health, but a lot of different areas. And they also just make it near impossible to be able to really do the kind of focused activity that you need to in order to perform optimally. And so we use heart rate variability when people are doing neurofeedback. They're also doing heart rate variability, sometimes listening to a pacer. We give them homework, and that becomes something that they do on a daily basis, that sort of thing. And it can be kind of its own intervention. Literally, we can do an assessment an assessment and training in one session and get you going to be able to start doing that homework on your own, and can really be beneficial in terms of overall health and the health of your nervous system. So I'm going to skip through some of that. Okay, we're going to switch now, because we need to get to looking at your brain. I'm excited about this. This is the moment of truth. So we're just switching, for those of you online, we're just working on switching the technology so that we can actually see Randall's brain up here on the big screen. We didn't tell you that, did we? Look at that. I know, we'll tell you in just a minute. I'm just gonna, are we gonna?
So, yeah, for you, if you can like sit as still as you can, kind of let your face relax as much as you can still have your kind of eyes open on the screen. So eventually, put some neurofeedback up there. Can you hear?
Okay. So we good now? That's as big as it's getting? Yep. Okay, it's good. All right. So sorry, we can't move this out of the way, so we'll just talk about it. So this is your EEG. So each one of these lines lines up with one of the sensors that's on the cap that you're wearing. And so we're able to kind of monitor your EEG in real time here, right? So we could, we can look like, you see this wiggly stuff here, that's one of your sensors by your eyes, because you're looking around, and so it's moving a bit. Same one with this one, that's a little wonky. I'm going to suggest that you're carrying tension in your left jaw. So I just want you to loosen it up and watch this and see what happens with it. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? So this is did you notice the change? Okay. Okay. So let me see this one, right? The red one right here. Yep. Look at what that waveform, or what looks like a waveform, looks like. Now let your jaw drop. See how it cleaned up? Yeah. So that was a muscle artifact in there, and so it wasn't actually EEG. So a lot of times, that's not an uncommon thing. So a lot of times when we're training, doing neurofeedback, we'll train on that as well, teaching the brain how to recognize, I need to loosen, right? That kind of thing. That's more of a biofeedback kind of thing happening at that point in time. Over here on this side, you see something we call head maps. You can see it's the different frequencies, delta, theta, alpha, beta, high beta. This one doesn't show gamma on it. When we are doing training, what we're doing is training Randall's brain to a database of kind of peak performance brains that are normed for your age and your sex, right? So it's true pure brains of yours. This is gonna tell us how, what your brain is looking like compared to that peak performance group. When it's green, that's kind of quote unquote neurotypical. Anything that's in the cooler colors like blues, that means deficiency in that particular frequency, and anything that's in the warmer colors, the yellows, reds, oranges, that's excess of that particular wave in that frequency. So that can help us to see that. We can also see some of that as we're looking at the EEG as well. How about we do some neurofeedback? So we do primarily in the clinic, we do something called 19-channel neurofeedback. It's not all that we do, but that's the primary type of neurofeedback we do. It's Loretta neurofeedback. And so we typically will train a whole network when we do that kind of a neurofeedback. So maybe your salience network, when we did your QEEG, showed up as being fairly dysregulated. And so we might decide that's the network we're going to train, right? And so Adam gets you all hooked up, ready to train, pulls up your salience network so that we're going to train that one. And then what's going to happen in a minute here is Randall's going to start flying this airplane with his brain. So you notice he has no remote control things in his hands, right? He's literally, when the computer reads his beat, kind of behaving sort of similarly, like kind of anything in the realm of what's the peak performance group looks like. It's going to have this flying object kind of go straight, nice and smooth, and head toward the target that it's supposed to fly through. When it flies through, it flips over, so there's a visual stimulus, and it makes a swishing sound, so there's an auditory stimulus. That stimuli is reinforcing for the brain. So it might not be for your mind, although when you do neurofeedback, you start to feel kind of comforted sometimes, or at least I always do, with that sound of that swishing. It just becomes kind of associated with something positive. But it's literally the stimuli that your brain wants. So as operant conditioning tells us, if you do the desired behavior, you get the reward, and then you want more, and so you're likely to do that behavior again. So we just train over and over and over again as the brain learns how to regulate itself. So we're really not telling it what to do. We're giving it some parameters and saying, hey, this way. Right? And then it learns how to do it on its own, right? So Adam, let's have him fly. Do we not have any metrics in here? There we go. Okay, I was like, where did they go? So a couple of things here. What you see here, and it's just delaying for some reason, technology, but these are all metrics of dysregulation in this particular network. And we can tell how many, do you want to flip back to that screen? We can see here that this network has 455 metrics of dysregulation. And so that's a lot of training that we can do. No, that's not. We're using somebody else's data. No, yeah, we'd have to hunt for a network that was dysregulated with you. Okay, so let me describe a little bit of what's going on here. So what Randall's job is in this process is to sit and watch his brain play this game, like be a good best friend and just hang out and watch your best friend play a video game, right? His best friend is his brain. And so we want him just looking straight ahead. So usually you're either looking at the target, not this, but the actual target, or the line down here. And that's all you do the whole time that you're doing neurofeedback, is just do that. And then your brain starts to figure out what to do. So you can see that his brain has caught on. He's going through the target, right? So there's going to be some stimuli that will produce a reward for him. And then he will just sit here and we'll train. What's happening over here, you see this red line right here? That's called the training threshold. That's actually the number of standard deviations from the norm that this particular network is at. And so what we do in what our goal is, so right now we see this one's at about 4 standard deviations. Our goal is to make this training hard enough that his brain has to figure out how to regulate itself, right? But not too hard, because we want it to have some reward, otherwise it's not going to learn. Once he gets that figured out, we're going to lower this threshold and make it harder for him, right? We're moving it down more and more toward that, more of getting rid of some of the standard, or the dysregulation, and lowering the standard deviations of dysregulation. If he misses one, it means that his brain, it means that his brain lost the plot for a minute and forgot that it's what we're trying to have it do, right? So the computer is seeing that, oops, it didn't produce the right kinds of frequencies in the right areas, that sort of thing. And so it doesn't get rewarded, right? It went away from kind of peak performance. Yep. No, you shouldn't be moving your eyes at all. You should be just having your eyes stay focused. Like if for you, it might be easier just to focus. Yeah, yes. And that's all you're doing, right? That's it. So your moving your eyes has nothing to do with whether or not it's going through the target.
Thank you for that reason.
Yes. And then let's see, what else can we show? This up here is just giving us, as we're training him, some indication of like, do we have this hard enough or not? Typically, sweet spot's somewhere around 40, 50 to 60, like, is where you should kind of have the training with some 100%. This is just percent of how much correct behavior with. And so you want a little bit of 100% because then it's going to go through and get the reward and they'll go, oh, I want to do that more, right? The brain will, not you. You could get really bored of this.
Yeah.
Yep.
My brain is doing this. I'm not really trying to do anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And you start to very quickly be able to kind of differentiate brain from mind, right? Yeah. Yep. Yep. So this is, what happens, like these metrics are oftentimes leading to the brain behaving in ways that cause trouble, right? So some of us might call them symptoms. Somebody might say, I'm trying to get, like what Kellen was talking about, trying to kind of get this thing and I can't quite get it, right? And that's what this stuff is really creating. And so as people train and they work on regulating their brain, those kinds of things get better, symptoms reduce, that sort of thing. How does he steer better? Yeah, it's a great question. He does exactly what he's doing. I don't know if you can see him from the front here, but he's like doing a good job of just watching that green circle. And that's how he's going to do it. He's just going to stay consistent, be patient, breathe, hydrate. And over time, what's going to happen is his brain is going to start learning. This is what I do. And then I get, this reward of this plane flipping over, this visual stimulus. Yeah, so right now, he's just doing you are a perfect client right now. That is incredible. Yeah, I can't tell you how he did that. Yeah.
Am I on mute or what is with me now?
Yeah, we're really streaming you now. So as Guy is trying to pull that up, I'm just gonna, there it is. Okay, perfect. Yep.
So the metrics come from the QEEG, right? So when you do QEEG, that's where we pulls out how is any one brain dysregulated compared to agents like managed normative database of peak performance brains. So then those, if we've done a QEEG on you, those would be your metrics there that you'd be training against the dysregulation. So we get a map. That's where we derive those numbers. So I don't know if we want to switch over. If all goes well here, I'm just going to pull up. Okay, so temperature, skin conductivity, blood volume pulse. So again, how much blood is moving through the periphery, respiration rate, so breaths per minute. On here, we get to see heart rate. So the range of the actual heart rate, but then we're also looking at heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is the beat to beat difference. So our heart should not beat like a metronome. So it could be like a half a second between, and then a quarter second, and then a 3/4 of a second, and then half a second, and a quarter of a second. Variability, because you want your heart beating when you need it to beat, and not beating when you don't need it to beat, right? So it's a conservation of energy, conservation of wear and tear. And this is actually like we're using the heart as a window into the whole autonomic nervous system. So we'd say the same thing about you want your digestion to move at a certain pace, not too fast, not too slow. You want your kidneys to process at a certain pace. You want your liver to process at a certain pace. And the autonomic nervous system is running all of that. And so it's balancing everything from the ears down. And you want it doing that at very precisely, you don't want it to be in fits and starts. So we use heart rate variability as a way to look at that system to give us clues to see how well is your autonomic nervous system maintaining the body. And then if it's off, we would do a biofeedback training. And very similar to what we were doing when you were seeing air, we could gamify it and have somebody playing Pac-Man or something as a way to increase their heart rate variability or increase their temperature or lower their skin conductivity or whatever the metric is that we might want to get them to shift. So again, just because we're at the end, any curiosity questions about biofeedback? This one? Sure. Yeah. So what that's looking at, this is a great question. I love it. Not enough people ask it. So when we're looking at heart rate variability, so as I said, that there's that timing, so quarter second, half second, 3/4 of a second. So this is a readout of how variable is your variability. And of the ways that your heart could be variable, what part of this spectrum is it in? So you could have a fair amount of variability, but it might be up here in this red. So what we call high frequency. So that's actually not great. So that's more sympathetic driving of heart rate variability. And we want it to be down here in the green or even the blue down in low. So what we're seeing right here, this is great. He's breathing around down here around 4 or 5 breaths per minute and maintaining that for a long enough period that his heart rhythm is moving into, an optimal pattern of variability. Okay, then I think you're doing a fantastic job. You can stay.
I'm fine.
Adam, opinion.
In 4, hold 4, down 4, out 4. No.
Perfect. Yep, exactly. And so like we do a QEG, we can do an RFD, a resonant frequency determination. Everybody has, it's like a fingerprint. Everybody has their own personal resonant frequency, which is where your cardiac rhythm, your respiratory rhythm, and your baroreflex. So your baroreflex is what controls the dilation of your vasculature. So think blood pressure, right? So when those 3 systems sync up, come into harmony, we move into kind of an ultimate state of rest and digest. It feels amazing when you actually shift into your resonant frequency and your autonomic, all those systems move into it. So that's one of the things that we would do with a client is we do an RFD to find out what your optimal breathing rate is, where your system moves into kind of a self-harmony. And then that's the rate somebody would breathe at. So you had said you were doing like a 4 in, 4 out. So I mean, that was clearly doing well for you, but we might find out that you're a 5 or a 5.5 or a 4.5. And the difference in health outcomes from breathing close to your resonant frequency and breathing at your resonant frequency is a dramatic difference. So somebody can be breathing close to their resonant frequency, say somebody with high blood pressure, and they're trying to use HRV to lower their blood pressure. And let's say they're a 6, but they're breathing at 6.5. They may not be getting any significant blood pressure control from doing their breathing. Even though they're that close, it's just the system isn't harmonizing. But you get them breathing at 6 and all of a sudden, their blood pressure drops to normal. We train it for a few weeks, then their blood pressure normalizes. Like not when they're breathing, but just when they're out living their life, their system has recalibrated. It has learned how to self-regulate again. So a lot of power in the biofeedback. Okay, so we'll call it here. If you have questions, feel free to grab one of us. If you want to do a demo, meet us or one of the techs back there. Thank you for coming. It was a delight. Usually the first Tuesday of every month. We are off a little bit because it's January and the whole holiday thing, but normally the first Tuesday of every month. So please come back and join us.